So what's it like actually sitting here, perfectly positioned between two $50,000 reference grade loudspeakers? What is a reference grade speaker by Sonus Faber? What's the how and why of it, the nuts and bolts? Well, I'm going to do the best I can to break that down for you next, but really nothing compares to what that sitting in this chair experience is like. However, there is a formula for building a product like this, so let's go talk about it. So take a close-up look at the Il Cremonese. First, you're going to notice that it's gorgeous. But the second thing that you may notice is that here's the famous DAD tweeter, the damped apex dome. Here's that wood pulp and K-pop mid-range that we all know and love, the two of these making the voice of Sonus faber. Here is the cellulose bass drivers. So what's the deal with the Il Cremonese? Why is this 50 grand and why does it get the name reference? Everything about this speaker is classic Sonus faber, but taken to its logical extreme and conclusion, its ultimate realization, the masterwork of these craftsmen. So let's talk about the individual drivers on the Il Cremonese. Now, I've already made mention that they're what you're familiar with, just taken to that maximum, right? But let's get into that detail just a little bit more. What's going on here in this speaker? Looking at the damped apex dome that we all know and love, it's still a 28mm dome, or 1.1 inches, and of course, made out of silk. But notice that the part of it that forms the DAD, the damped apex, this is a much sleeker looking and much more precisely mounted piece of metal. And in the middle of that arc, you have the point in which that little polypropylene tip underneath that brushes up against the tweeter is making contact. Something that I noticed immediately on this speaker versus most of the other Sonus faber models is that little chunk of polypropylene is a little bit thicker, seems to be covering just a little bit more of that tweeter's apex. Also because of the cabinet that this tweeter is installed into, because that's kind of the other half of this driver equation, if you will. How good is the cabinet the driver's in? That's a huge factor. All of these chambers between all of these drivers are completely separated from each other. So the entire cabinet is tuned driver by driver, and it really doesn't get any better than that. It's still the most athletic, expressive, and I think best imaging piece of silk I've ever heard on a loudspeaker. And this is its maximum, finally being installed in a reference product with all those little fine details turned up to 11 in perfect cabinetry. Now moving on to the mid-range, the second part that makes the voice of Sonus faber. The wood pulp mid-range in the Il Cremonese, again, very familiar, we know about this driver. But this is physically different from the other ones that we've talked about thus far. This is a 7-inch version of the famous wood pulp and K-pop mid-range that already flattered human voices and acoustic instruments better than almost anything else. This mid-range, when you take it from about 4 inches to more like 7, certain bass tones and male voices really come back and move to the front of the pack when it comes to what you're actually listening to, quite like they haven't in the past. One of the best examples I can think of this, and I can't take full credit for it as I did hear this specific thing mentioned by a similar reviewer as well. Think Johnny Cash singing Hurt, and that gravelly tone that an aged Johnny Cash has in the bass of his voice. On a smaller wood pulp mid-range, it still sounds wonderful, don't get me wrong, but you don't quite get that deepest depth of that gravelly kind of guttural male voice. Move up to the Il Cremonese, get a few extra inches on the mid-range, and the realism of a man like Johnny Cash really returns and just fully inserts itself into the room and therefore into your experience. Really, that's about the best way that I can sum up the improvement of moving to a mid-range like this in a speaker like the Il Cremonese. Let's move to our bass drivers, but there's a little hidden secret of the Il Cremonese, and we'll get into that in just a second. But you're gonna see these and be like, wait a minute, that looks like it's the same size as the mid-range, just a little bit different. Well, it is. 7-inch mid-range, 7-inch bass driver, really, really good blending. Very similar drivers, a little bit different material, but same size, close placement. That transition point from your lower to mid-bass tones and then getting into your higher bass as the mid-range starts to come in, this transition point is superb. And one of the best things about the Il Cremonese through and through is how everything is localized in this speaker in terms of sound placement in your soundstage, but it manages to do all that without you really hearing the individual drivers either. Now, the Sonus faber Il Cremonese has a little trick up its sleeve, and it in fact belongs to a class of speaker that, while I have some experience with, not a whole lot. This is actually a 3.5-way speaker, meaning there's a little bit extra going on here. Look at that. That's an 8.6-inch bass driver hiding on the bottom of the Il Cremonese, facing toward the back wall, using that for reinforcement. It is effectively a subwoofer integrated into your speaker, and I can get away with saying that because it's not just a low-playing bass driver, but this being on a completely separate crossover that cuts at 80 Hertz means it is handling nothing but traditional sub frequencies. While I would never say don't run a sub with the Il Cremonese, it is one of the first speakers I've ever heard where I really didn't need or want for a sub all that much. Once you achieve reproducing those strong foundational bass frequencies in a room in a way that is natural and controlled and real without being boomy, but with totally filling the room and feeling like they are sweeping through you, now you're getting there. And that's the first big element, I believe, in this speaker's arsenal for doing just that. So now we've covered all of the drivers in the Il Cremonese in detail, but you'll notice that every time I said something about one of these individual drivers, I said something about the cabinet too, which of course leads us into our next point of review, the cabinet itself. Let's have a closer look. The thing about the Il Cremonese is that this speaker is meant to be one of the products that fully encapsulates Sonus Faber's vision to essentially build you an instrument in your room capable of reproducing virtually any music you wish. Imagine the loudspeaker itself becoming the instrument. This cabinet inside, and as you can see from each of these 5 surfaces, is a completely aperiodic cabinet, meaning that nothing in here meets at a hard corner or right angle. Right angles are bad news for audio. So by doing this, we avoid a major point of contention when it comes to the internal frequencies of a cabinet, already removed simply by following that timeless violin lute design. Now, as you can see here, we have basically 5 surfaces to this speaker. You may say 6 counting the spine on the back, but for the internals of the cabinet being concerned, it is more like a pentagon, which is precisely what we're looking for when managing those back frequencies that are coming off the back end of the driver. Every time you create an action, you create a reaction, and you've got to do something about that reaction. That's why cabinet design in speakers is equally as important as the drivers. Some may even say more, as these drivers are so similar to some other Sonus faber speakers, a little refined, mind you, like I talked about, but it's really this that's doing so much of the lifting here. Your mid and high frequency driver, your mid-range and tweeter of course, have their crossover packed right up here just underneath the top plate of the speaker, and that crossover looks almost like the crossover you find in an entire 3-way speaker for most other things. And that's just serving these 2 drivers. Again, internal construction telling more of the story of how you create a reference experience. Completely in the aesthetic sense, this is a beautiful product and an incredible item to put into your room. Not only, of course, to hear, because we know that it is, but to look upon. I think Sonus faber has probably the best selection of wood finishes in this entire industry. Their walnut, redwood, and wenge, all of them are at their best in this speaker. Finally, if you look at the back of the speaker, have you ever seen a binding post quite like this? Look how they're laid flat on the bottom of the speaker, sitting just up from the floor, but giving you plenty of space to connect really any type of connector that you could want. Using high-end spades like we are on our AudioQuest William Tell cables today, or a high-end banana, whatever your choice, it's going to fit and seat into this speaker perfectly, and you've got plenty of room back here to make an excellent connection. What is it like actually listening to some of our favorite music on this speaker? What do they do for the music? And what can that tell you and tell me? For example, one of my most favorite tracks of all time, and they rag on me here all day because I listen to it way too much. I kind of deserve it. Cocoon by John Gam. Album, The Faintest Idea. John has a way of recording that makes his guitar sound almost binaural in a way. And his voice kind of set in the background rather than the foreground, as really it's the guitar that's the star of the show. At the end of Cocoon, you'll hear it come in toward the last minute of the song. He plays a hammer during the chorus that he doesn't play during any other part of the song. On this speaker, because of the way Sonus faber, but particularly the Il Cremonese being that logical extreme of what Sonus faber is, takes that hammer, and really the only word I have for how that makes me feel is cathartic. Like tears of joy, cathartic. That's what it's like. I can't wait to be able to share the experience that this has given us with all of you who'd like to come and see for yourself. And again, I implore you, even if it's something you can't yet take home, come and have this experience and know what is possible. Until then, to learn more information along the way, please visit gramophone.com where you can read more about Sonus faber. And finally, give us a call at one of our showrooms. You'll find us in Timonium, Columbia, and Gaithersburg, Maryland. Finally, we have a lovely and very beautiful kitchen design center in Hunt Valley where they can do all kinds of wonders for your home interior design. So make sure you visit them as well. If you really enjoyed this, I'd ask you to give us a like. All of us here put a lot into this one because we were just so thrilled and so honored to be able to do this. So if you really got some joy or some knowledge out of this, please hit that like button. It would mean the world to us. Drop a comment down below. We'd love to talk to you and connect. Consider subscribing. And also, question of the day, answer down below. What is your favorite Sonus faber product, if you've heard one? And what currently is your dream speaker you most want to hear? Look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Be seeing you.